Tendering obviously is an activity that's undertaken by a party, usually a government body, but increasingly the private sector, but government bodies have historically undertaken lots of tenders and procurement. The process has got in it lots of sort of legal risk and legal issues which need to be addressed, need to be known about, and it's really important that those risks are understood and that measures are put in place to mitigate them and avoid them. Up until 1997, in Australia, there wasn't what we now know to be called the process contract, and the process contract is a contract that's formed between the entity that's letting the tender and all of the entities that respond to that tender. The conditions of the process contract, which is what it's called, are generally speaking the conditions of tendering. So they include things like the obligation on behalf of the entity letting the tender to receive tenders on or before the closing date. So they actually have to receive them and consider them. So if an organisation, for example, doesn't even consider a tender that's put in on or before the closing date, then that exposes that organisation to legal risk. So that's one. Another important tender condition usually is the disclosure of the evaluation criteria. So the criteria against which tenders will be evaluated. And it is a condition of the process contract that that entity will assess those tenders in accordance with those criteria. And there are numerous cases around in Australia and elsewhere where that hasn't happened, and again that exposes the entity to significant legal risk. So where any one of the tenderers can say, you promised to me that you were going to look at these factors. When looking at my tender, you didn't. You looked at those factors. I didn't win. Somebody else won. One of the reasons I didn't win is because you did not make good on your promise to me as to how you go about the process, and I'm going to sue you for that. And that can expose organisations letting tenders to significant damages. Full lost profits in relation to the contract have been known. Sort of compensatory type damages, certainly the costs of putting the tender together and putting the tender in, and when you multiply that by 10, 15, 20 aggrieved tenderers, that can be a significant sum of money. Plus, as I mentioned, the lost profits you can put on top of that, and then maybe some other damages as well. So it can be quite a lot. On the other side of the coin, though, the process contract has some benefit to the tendering entities in as much as the tenderers have some obligations as well. So they have obligations, for example, to keep their tender open and valid for acceptance for 60 or 90 days. That's a term of the process contract. And equally, they have an obligation then to go forward and sign a contract and enter into a contract for the goods or services should they be selected. A very interesting and developing area at the moment is whether or not there is an implied term in the process contract that governments have to act fairly and in good faith and honestly and so on when undertaking the procurement activity, whether or not that's stated as part of the process contract. The reason that's relevant is because if it is a term of the process contract implied, so it wouldn't be written in the process contract or in the tender conditions, but it's implied by law, then again tenderers who feel that they've been aggrieved by a breach of that process contract condition can sue for that. Recent examples of where this has come up have been in Canada and also Northern Ireland, less so here. As I say, it's a very developing and new area. But it included a situation where a local council went to tender for waste services, a collection of waste and waste services, and the tenders put their tenders in and they were all above budget. Now the tender prices received from all 5 tenderers at the time were disclosed. That was just the way that the council does things, and there wasn't a problem with that. That's their policies and rules and procedures, so that's okay. They disclosed the prices. They then abandoned the tender because they said it's beyond our budget and we can't go ahead. 12 months later, they went back out to tender, and there was a 6th tenderer, so there was the original 5 plus a 6th tenderer, who was able to underprice the tender for those services because of the disclosure 12 months previously. And at first instance, the judge found that the council had breached its obligation of the implied term of fairness and fair dealing amongst tenderers by that publication, and basically had given this other party an unfair advantage. Interestingly, that case was overturned on appeal, but that just goes to show the uncertainty in relation to this term of the process contract and how litigious some of these tenderers are getting.